So I'm going to talk precisely about statutory interpretation, which is pretty easy and pretty straightforward. So when we talk about statutes, we're talking about codified things that are explicitly written down. And so when we're talking about statutory interpretation, we are talking about how we interpret those laws that are codified and written down. And so this part of the law involves how the argument is made by the lawyers or solicitors or whoever, including the individual if you are representing yourself pro se or self-representing. So how you interpret what is given as your law or rights. So in the same breath, judges also look at the degrees of freedom that you're given and what the law says about what can and can't be done, what rights you have and what rights you forfeit. So statutory interpretation is an issue because of two major concerns that surround the vagueness or ambiguity of something. But if that doesn't occur, then there is no need for further rules of interpretation, and we'll go over the rules and the canons and the philosophies behind, and then you see the logic as to why it becomes a problem. So the canons of statutory interpretation are broadly three, and they textual or literal interpretation, substantive, and deference. So I'll go over each one of them quickly. When we're talking about textual interpretation, we are talking about what is written explicitly, the plain meaning. When you say something, you probably mean exactly what you say, right? But then we also have a rule against sepplage, which is like a rule against saying things in excess or saying things that would have broader meaning. So if there's one explicit way of saying it that doesn't also mean other things, then we'll go with that one. And then we have a justum generis, which simply says things of the same kind. So if it says, like, we sort of go with this general acts and laws have been saying this, so this probably would, how does it fit into this general structure best if we interpret it as A or B or C, and then we sort of determine from there which is the right one. And then expressio unis est exclusio alterius means if one thing is explicitly said, then that's what it means. You can't say A and mean not A, or A and B. If we say the Fifth Amendment, you have the right not to respond, not to self-incriminate yourself, you have certain rights, then that's it, you have them. If we say you cannot be searched without probable cause or without a warrant, and that's the fault, then that is as it is. So what is explicitly said is what goes, not what might be implied. So in terms of where there's a sort of assumed or applicable inference to be applied and a contrary explicit thing that has been said, we also just favor what has been explicitly said. And we have things of the same subject matter or things of the same kind. We also put that and bracket that together when we're interpreting. I suppose there's also nocieta socis, or socis, which simply says we interpret things according to the company they keep, according to the context rather. And so, yeah, that's another way of interpreting based on the context, just as we sort of decipher the word meaning according to the context of the paragraph or of the speaker, in terms where the word might have varying meanings. Ridendo singular singularis says things referring to each other can just be summed up. So it's redundant in legal terms to say things using the same way, different words saying the same things, and that sort of like confuses the thing. So we start to decompress it and make it as general as possible. We also have sort of legal, logical part where we try to separate the general from the specific. So you can't really have a general conclusion from specific parts of different laws or different statutes. So it's sort of a safeguard towards generalizing or stereotyping, or So substantive, this is the textual where we are looking at what is written down. Then we have to go deeper as into what can and can't be, right? Contra bonus. By this we mean we have basic right. We have things that we say these are basic values, these are basic human rights, and we call them international law. And so we also have societal values and rules. And so when we look at the lawmakers, we expect them to not do anything that violates this. And with that same breath, we will look at whatever is being written in the context of our values. And so that's the substantive argument. And in the instance where there are two ways of viewing it or more, the rule of leniency demands that the interpretation favors the defendant, because we don't want to be retrospective. That's another argument on whether laws should be retrospective in nature or not. So we don't want to create new laws or new biases that sort of disadvantage a person, because if it's not a crime at the point where it happened or occurred, then we shouldn't create laws to punish someone. Or that's pretty much how it's viewed, though we have cases where the UN sort of did that, especially with genocides and special tribunes and stuff like that. But the general populace and the general feeling is that we shouldn't make such retrospective laws, because it just opens up a canon of worms. So this is just value, the value part. So we talked about what's explicitly written, which is the textual. Now we are talking about the substantive nature of it, which is more or less our values and moral views. And then the last one is the deference canon or principle, and this really talks about using other branches of the legal system. So we have the courts, we also have the administrative bodies and other bodies alike, and so we want to include them as well, because sometimes when these things are made, they are delegated, and each wing might have a voice, and we want to understand the reasoning behind these things. So there's also a rule on avoidance, which simply says when two laws or two rulings contradict, the one that is later prevails. By this we mean society is constantly changing, so an older law might have been changed for reasons beyond beyond. I can't just make an example out of my head, but maybe raw, the case where we start recognizing same-sex relationships, marriages, and stuff like that. So maybe there was an explicit law that said this is wrong. I'm guessing a law against that, and then so it's still there, but it's now updated, and there are new laws that came after this case law. So there's the first case law, and then there will be codified laws that will be then put in place. So the later laws adjust to the situations and systems, and they are more current, and so we use them as opposed to the outdated and old law. And so we have 3 principles. Some change them into 4, but then they sort of come from the same things, and these are rules of statutory interpretation. So we have the literal rule, which is basically the textual interpretation, like what it says is what we are going to interpret it as. But there is instances where the rule would sort of be confusing in the literal sense. So we look at the intent behind it, and it's now called the mischief rule. So we are looking at what mischief, what problem was being solved in that case, and then that is the mischief, and so how did they intend to solve it? And that will sort of give us a framework as to why this law was created, or why it was worded the way it was worded, and how we can sort of adapt it in this society now, given the changes or lack of changes. And so we also have the purposive rule, which emanates from the mischief rule, and I would argue that it's the same thing, so I won't delve into it, but it simply looks at the purpose, the reasoning behind the making of that law. However, there is that interpretation behind the purpose. So maybe at one point we believe that say in South Africa, where we had the society doing correctional rapists, abductions and stuff like that, and they believed to their very core that this is wrong. And we have the state and church relationships that blur the lines between the two, and so maybe we had a wrong view of things, and we have since revised them. So what we want to do is sort of avoid application of laws or rules that would lead to an absurd conclusion, and so we will put into play the golden rule, and the golden rule would demand that we sort of make sense and sort of reinterpret the statutes and the laws in a way that would not lead to an absurd conclusion or viewpoint. And this sums up statutory interpretation. What you would want to do now is read some case laws and some arguments as to the limitations of this, the applications of which, and the challenges of applying this. And but as you have noticed, they sort of like try to balance each other. Where one leaves gaps, the other one tries to address, and so it goes. But you still have judges who believe that no matter what is written should go. We shouldn't try to change anything. If we want to change anything, then let the lawmakers change it. It's not the judge's duties. And an example is Mapp versus Ohio in the United States law, where the judge simply says, well, now the criminal goes free, not because he's not guilty, but because the law gives them the right to go free. And if we don't follow the law, then we're a baseless society, which is kind of right. So the law has to constantly adjust to society and try to be as relevant as possible, so that we don't have an absurd reality like in this case where criminal actually goes free. And so the justice system must work. Hence, we revise our laws, and the later laws take precedence over the prior laws. I hope this helped, and I would argue that actually watching this and taking everything that I said, you